Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Caldera is here. The Pacific update is here for Warzone, and obviously that means we've got a lot to experience for the foreseeable future. New map, new weapons, new anti-cheat, all sorts of stuff like that, all of which you're going to be experiencing on some brand new settings. Yes, the Vanguard update did actually end up changing a handful of different things in the settings menu itself, and obviously as time goes on, we're always finding out, hey, maybe we should be using this over this setting and whatnot. So today I wanted to go over all the best settings for Warzone Pacific, go over the best controller settings, the best PC settings. So we got literally all platforms covered in one video here. If you enjoyed the video at any point, or if you find it helpful as we go through it all, let me know by dropping a like on it. It would be seriously appreciated. Let's try and aim for 3,000 likes on this one. And of course, if you're new to the channel, or if you have not already subscribed, this is the best place to be for everything going on in COD. And just about 58% of you guys watching the videos are not subscribed yet. So be sure to hit that sub button, click that bell icon. That way you can always guarantee you are up to date with everything going on in the world of Call of Duty. Also, if you haven't gotten yourself a pair of Gamer Advantage glasses, I use these things each and every single day. They are the absolute best part of my setup. They help your sleep, they help your eyes. It's a win-win situation all around. If you want to get a pair for yourself, right now, code WhosImmortal actually gets you 20% off your entire order as opposed to the normal 10%, but only through the end of the month. So now is the best time to buy. Link down in the description below. Now, when it comes to settings, we've got a lot to go over. Now, I'm here on PC, so I have all the possible settings available, but we also can go over all the console options because everything that console has, PC also has. So it's a little bit of overview of everything. Regardless of what platform you're on, we'll go over the best settings for it. Starting first here on keyboard and mouse. Honestly, when it comes down to stuff like this, it really is preference based. You know, keybinds and whatnot, sensitivity and whatnot, especially on mouse and keyboard, is very much so what feels the best to you. There's not really a best setting for a lot of these, you know, like ADS sense multiplier and regular sensitivity, whether you want smoothing on or not, whether you want, you know, F to open doors or to get loot, or you want E to melee. It all comes down to what you're most comfortable with. So for that stuff, I'd recommend using your own personal preference keybinds. There really isn't a way to recommend the best settings for specifically keyboard and mouse stuff. But obviously PC has the graphics advantage over console. You got a lot more options here, a lot more settings to utilize here. So getting into these, first up, we got the display stuff. Obviously, if you're on PC, you always want to be playing in full screen mode. That's where you're going to get the best frames. I've got, you know, the 3090 set up and everything. 240 hertz is my personal preference. Currently, I'm sitting on that 200 render res because I've been testing how the game runs when I use this, but usually I'd be playing on just regular 100 render res. I'd recommend you play on 100 render res just because that's going to be your default. That's what the game will run the smoothest on. So I wouldn't ever really recommend bumping that up unless you have just an overkill rig or you're going for like screenshots or something for a video like what I usually do. But I wouldn't recommend really bumping that up for gameplay purposes. Dynamic resolution, do not turn this on. It'll mess with your game. It'll make it look very, very weird. Would not recommend ever messing with that. Brightness, I always have on 55 in literally every single COD game. This does sort of depend on what your monitor looks like though, what's too bright or too dark for you. So that one is more so personal preference based. Then we also have the whole low latency mode on some graphics cards. If you have an applicable one, this is definitely something you want to look into. I'm running enabled plus boost. This just feels like it makes my game run better and run smoother, especially in some of those more taxing areas on the map. So this is definitely something I'd recommend turning on if you're able to do so. Now, when it comes to quality, this is an especially important tab. So, you know, get your notepads out, start taking the screenshots if you need. Obviously, for field of view, where it's applicable, I'd recommend anywhere between 100 and 120. I think 110 is really the sweet spot. I prefer 120 because I like the full visual clarity. I like how it looks, and that's what I'm used to. But if you're just now jumping, you know, over from console to PC, if you're just trying out an FOV slider in general, I'd say like in between 100 and 110 is probably where you should start. Then eventually work your way up towards like 120, where obviously that's the max. And most importantly, you want to have your ADS field of view unaffected. This is going to make it so that when you aim down sights, it's not going to zoom in as much, but because of that, you have way less visual recoil. It's way easier to stay on target. This is what makes it look like everyone is just running a no recoil setup. It 100% is the best possible thing to use. Now, this is actually a brand new setting available in the quality options. Camera movement. We have this over in Vanguard. Basically, this is the intensity of the camera or the screen shake when things are going on in game. Absolutely turn this to least. You're still going to have 50% camera shake, but hey, that's half of what the default is at 100 here. So you don't want to have that on default. Turn this down. That way, if there's explosions or big things going on in game and your screen is shaking, it's not going to be as noticeable and as obnoxious to your gameplay. You'll be able to focus up a little bit better with that on least. Now, getting into the details and textures. First and foremost, this stuff is entirely dependent on your PC's capability. Like I said at the start, I've got a 3090 in here. I've got a 5950X in here as well on my new gaming PC. So I have like the top of the top, best of the best, right? So this is dedicated to being the most optimized PC it can be, so I can run games on, you know, very high settings and have good frame rates. Most people, though, especially with the whole graphics card fiasco, don't necessarily have the ability to get their hands on, you know, the 3080s, the 3090s and whatnot. So if I'm running high on something, it's because it's not too taxing on my rig, whereas you might want to be running normal or low or very low in some cases, because that's what's going to give you the best frames overall. So this stuff, again, there's not really a best option, but I can still give you my recommendation of what I think you should focus on, because obviously you see the VRAM usage there at the bottom. You can mess around with this depending on what your rig is and either push it or limit it to certain extents. So streaming quality I have on normal. It's just, it doesn't really seem like it affects anything too crazy. Texture resolution I like to have on high. However, obviously if you put this down in normal, it's way less taxing on your PC. So if you notice you're getting bad frames and you're okay with sacrificing a little bit of quality, turn that down a little bit. I'm keeping mine on high though, because I like the game to look good for the videos and for you guys. For the texture filter, I feel like this really doesn't do all that much. And also you can see as I change it, it doesn't really have an impact on the VRAM. So I leave mine as normal or high. Like I said, I really don't notice a difference in game, whether I have this on either of those. So that one does not matter too much. Particle quality I like to have on high. However, you know, simply for frames, you by no means need to have this on high. Low is perfectly acceptable. You're going to notice some explosions maybe a little bit more pixelated, but is that really the biggest deal if you're going for frames? Probably not. I'm leaving mine on high though, just because that works for me. The bullet impacts and sprays I do like to have on, just because it's useful information. You can get actual information out of this on enemy whereabouts and whatnot. So it's context clues. You might as well have those enabled. For tessellation, I leave this on all. You could definitely turn this down if you wanted to. You could even disable it if you wanted to get some better frames. It basically is just going to make the world feel a little bit more crisp and fine-tuned, if you will. The edges will appear a little bit sharper, and it'll look a little bit better. But again, if you're going for frames, if you want 144 frames or 240 frames for your monitor to, you know, have the smoothest possible experience, visual quality is probably not your #1 priority. I leave dismemberment and gore on just because there's blueprints that have that stuff. Might as well see it if it's going to be equipped on a weapon. On-demand texture streaming. This sort of comes down to what you're looking for. I use disabled on this just because I don't feel like I see a big difference on this stuff, but you can have it on standard quality or even high quality. However, in Vanguard, turning this off helped a lot with the packet burst and in-game lag. So if you're experiencing a lot of that here in Warzone Pacific, if you feel like your game is stuttering, you're feeling a little bit laggy in some cases, try turning this off if you have it on, and that might actually make a decent difference. So for what it's worth, I don't feel like this is a super important setting. If you have a good PC and you have good internet, by all means, feel free to have that on. But if you don't have the best setup, it's probably worth turning that off, or at least having that on standard at the max. Now getting into the post-processing effects here, I've got my filmic strength on 80. I've tried turning this down, but in the past, it made it feel like when I would ADS iron sights, it was really blurry for no reason. So I bumped it up, and 80 just seemed like the sweet spot where things looked clear. Film grain though, absolutely turn this to 0. There is 0 reason you want to have your game looking grainy, especially if you're trying to fight in like grassy areas or low visibility areas. It's going to be harder to spot players. You want the best clarity possible, so make sure you turn film grain off. DLSS is really only useful if you're playing on 1440p or 4K. If you're playing on 1080p, no point in having it on. If you play on a higher res though, it could be worthwhile looking into it, but that's more so dependent on what you're using, what your setup is, and whatnot there. Anti-aliasing, I leave on T2X here. This is just sort of like the default, and the game looks fine like this and runs fine with that. These are 3 very, very important settings here. Depth of field, turn that off immediately. It's going to blur the background when you're ADSing certain spots. Again, we want as much clarity as possible. There's no reason to blur anything ever, so turn depth of field off. Turn world motion blur off, because we don't need the world shaking and getting blurry when you're moving around. And same deal with weapon motion blur. This one is not as important as world, but still, you don't want blurry things on your screen. We want to be able to spot things as easily as possible, and the utmost clarity is going to make that possible, so make sure you turn all those off. 3 very, very big and key things to pay attention to. Then for shadows and lighting, the shadow map resolution I have on normal. I don't feel like I need to tax a rig here because of shadows. You're going to be able to see them so long as you can see them. That's all that matters, so I just leave that on normal. I have the cache enabled for sun shadows and spot shadows, just because I feel like that makes things run a little bit more smoothly. Particle lighting I have on high. Again, if you're noticing some stutters here and there, you could always try turning that one down a little bit, but that's not really a huge deal in game. Ray tracing, there's 0 reason to have this on in a multiplayer game. It's going to kill your VRAM usage and also going to kill your frames at the same time. sure, your game will look pretty, but what is going to look pretty is you just getting finessed by everyone because they have better frames than you, and you're stuttering and lagging and skipping about because you're taxing your system too much. So I would never recommend turning that on unless you're playing like a single player game. Ambient occlusion I have on both. The screen space reflections I have on high. You could always turn that down though, again, if you're experiencing stutters or some low frames. Again though, just to reiterate, those are my settings on a very, very powerful, specifically built gaming PC. Your rig is probably different, so tweak these settings that fit best for you. Now for the interface stuff, I don't use any colorblind stuff on my gameplay. I just add color correction when I edit, so I don't use any of this. If you need to though, by all means, feel free to do so. The minimap shape is really one of the more important things here. Always have this on square. It's going to give you more information to look at. Circle is just cutting off your ability to see enemies at a further distance, so keep that on square. And I like to have the rotation on just because I feel like it's easier to make callouts with those. Then this stuff doesn't really matter too much. The text chat stuff is completely irrelevant in this case. And then if you're on PC, you are going to have the ability to turn on some of this. Console also has the ability to use some of this as well, particularly the server latency and the packet loss. I like to turn on those notifications in the top left over there, just because I like to see, one, what my ping is to a certain server. If I'm on 110 ping, I know it's probably going to be a struggle of a game, or if there's packet loss, I know it's the server lagging or me lagging in some cases, so it's nice to know that. Then I also like to have the FPS counter, just because I like to see if my game's running smoothly. Now for audio settings, I'm keeping this the exact same as I had it on Verdansk and in original Warzone for the past 2 years. I use Boost High. This works well with my headset and my setup. I'm using DT990 Pros, and I have these plugged into my Go XLRs like my mix amp for my audio, so Boost High is what I'm hearing footsteps off of the best. It's what works the best for me. Depending on your situation, your headset, your amp, whatever it may be, you might want to look into, using Boost Low. Some players like home theater. Some players just like the studio reference. Sort of comes down to preference there, but whatever you feel like you hear footsteps with the best, that's what I'd recommend using. Now master volume does not matter. Have it as loud or as quiet as you want. Music volume, I'd recommend turning down. This is going to give you no real information in game. It's not going to help you figure out where players are or how much time is left before you have to rotate. There's no point in having that on. Dialogue volume is important because it's going to let you know when enemies are dropping in on your location. It's going to let you know if there's a UAV up, this, that, and everything else. So it's important to have this on, but I wouldn't have this too overbearing because obviously you need to hear gameplay volume. You need to hear the effects volume, which is the most important. That's footsteps, that's gunfire, that's player, VO and everything like that. So it's important to have that louder than everything else, but obviously you want to tune things to your specific preference. Cinematic volume does not matter. Juggernaut music does not matter. Hit marker sound effects does not matter. Mono audio, mono amount, also pretty irrelevant here. Voice chat stuff we don't have to worry about, so all that stuff is pretty obsolete. And then finally, getting into the controller settings here, this is especially useful on console. First up, for button layout, I always play on tactical. I've been playing on tactical since BO2. I do use a scuff controller here that I've used for quite some time, so having the paddles on the back is just a super ideal way to be able to slide cancel, to melee, to just play better without having to worry about messing with too much stuff on my controller. So I run tactical there. I don't change anything else. Now, dead zone is entirely individual. Your dead zone will not be the same as my dead zone. It won't be the same as Jowo's dead zone. It won't be the same as Scump's dead zone. It completely depends on your exact controller and how much stick drift it has. So it's something you're going to have to test. For me, 20 was too high as a default. 13 works just fine. It's like the bare minimum where I don't have stick drift and I'm able to play and have a good input response. So 13 works for me, but it's completely different for everyone else. Horizontal and vertical sense. I always play offset with horizontal being slightly higher just because vertical is very easy to use and control recoils. So I feel like that's worth having a little bit lower so you can be a little bit more precise. Whereas horizontal, I want to be able to flick relatively decently and relatively quickly. So I run 10-9. It's a nice medium ground where I'm both accurate and close and medium range fights. If you run a sense that's too high, up close you might be accurate, but at distance you're going to be very inaccurate. If you run a sense that's too slow, at a distance you might be very accurate, but up close you're not going to be able to twist and turn fast enough to keep up with enemies. So I use 10-9, and then I also use 0.73, oddly specific, but it works as my ADS sense multiplier, and that's what makes me be very accurate when I'm aiming down sights, and I'm able to track players and trace players very easily. For what it's worth though, that's also, 11 years of playing on a controller and fine-tuning the skills, if you want to call them that, over the course of time. Aim response curve type, same as before. I'm keeping this on dynamic. This is what feels the best to me. That reverse S curve is very easy to get used to, and it feels way smoother and way more responsive than just the standard setting. Linear though is also a great option, but dynamic is pretty much what you'll see all the pros use, and this is what I've been using for quite some time, and it definitely works the best for me. Vibration I always have off. Aim assist I keep on standard. All these other options feel very unnatural, and obviously you don't want to disable it, even though the game does that for you sometimes when you're fighting around certain areas, just because it's broken, but standard works fine. Scale aim assist with FOV. This has been proven to have a very minimal impact on your gameplay. You can sort of see what's going on if I hide the face cam here. When it's disabled, the aim assist region doesn't scale according to field of view. When it's enabled, the aim assist region does scale, so it would pull slightly more in theory, but after testing in game and multiple people sort of experiencing the same thing, there's really not a big difference with this being enabled or disabled. My weapon mount is always ADS plus melee. That feels super clean and super easy to me. Obviously, all the normal stuff here is going to be on hold with ADSing and equipment. User reload behavior, contextual tap is key here in Warzone. This is what's going to allow you to loot chests, pick up loot, and basically just interact with things rather way easier without having to worry about pressing the wrong button or reloading when you don't want to reload. So contextual tap is the way to go there. Armor plate behavior I always have on apply all, because you can cancel your armor plating if you need to, but having it as apply all on controller is very, very useful in my opinion, because you don't have to spam triangle or Y. Now, slide behavior, you absolutely want to have on tap. This will make it easier to slide cancel, and you can just consistently do that a lot easier when that's on tap. Having that on hold is pretty much going to hinder that ability. Auto move forward, definitely disable that. Tac sprint, I have on double tap. That's just the default. The important one here is automatic sprint. You want to have ATS on so you can slide cancel even easier. You don't have to destroy your thumb or your thumbstick either. So that's a big and very crucial setting as well. Then lastly, parachute auto deploy. Keep this one on disabled. That way you can get as close to the ground as you can possibly handle and then pull your chute manually rather than having it automatically deploy at a certain height. Basically, you can just get down to the ground faster and get to that loot quicker than some of the enemies who might have that on enabled. Then obviously the account stuff there doesn't matter. That has no relevance at all to best settings. But that said, those are the best settings to be using in Warzone Pacific here for the Caldera map. Whether you're on PC like me or if you're on console, this is what I would recommend using for the best optimal experience in game. And that is going to wrap things up for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, or if you found it helpful, let me know by dropping a like. It would be seriously appreciated. And of course, if you're new here or if you have not already subscribed, feel free to do so. That way you can always guarantee you are up to date with everything going on in COD, whether it be news, updates, class setups, tips. It is all right here each and every single day. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.